Delhi Declaration has been adopted with 100% consensus. This is a major breakthrough for India in G20. Now on Ukraine, India reiterates it's not an era for war stance. President Draupadi Murmu hosts a dinner for G20 leaders at the banquet hall at Bharat, Mandapam. India's G20 Sherpa Amitabh Kant speaks to NDTV and he says he's forcing everyone to go with the UN principles and that they drew red lines of each country. Now from Morocco, over 1,000 people have been killed in an earthquake of a magnitude of 6.8 which struck near Marrakesh. Now, we've been decoding the G20 throughout the day on NDTV, and of course, India has been taking forward several key points. Firstly, of course, we've been talking about what happened at the G20 under India's presidency. The declaration of the New Delhi leaders has been agreed, and a consensus, 100% consensus, which has happened for the very first time after 200 hours of deliberation has happened. Now, if you take a look at what exactly was spoken about in this particular declaration, we can take a look at how women were kept. Women-led development was one of the major things that was spoken about. Climate change was also one of the major things spoken about. Now, DPI, that is of course talking about public infrastructure, digital public infrastructure was another major inclusion. Now, also talking about Sri Lanka's debt plan and Namibia's debt plan, how India can come forward and help those countries. Now, India also launched connectivity focuses when it came to Europe and also voiced together the concerns of the global south. Now, the agenda for 2023 was sustainable development and to achieve it within the next 7 years. Now, India also spoke about, like I said, women-led development as well as women welfare when it came to closing the gap of women in the workforce was also discussed. Now, several leaders had, of course, briefed after the declaration had been taken forward and agreed upon by the G20 nations. Another major takeaway from this, of course, is that the African Union was added as part of the G20 grouping. Now, that was done, of course, as India takes forward and champions the cause of the African Union being included as part of this. Now, Prime Minister Modi, of course, says that this is the Sabka Vikas, Sabka Saath mantra that has been taken forward in the G20 as well. Now, of course, there were several other focus areas when it came to the G20 and the declaration. Sustainable development as well as, interestingly, green declaration also became part of it, which included the implementation of alternative fuels such as green hydrogen. We'd also seen several leaders talk about how India has already been championing climate action, as well as improving the financial capabilities of the World Bank and the IMF to ensure that there is enough funding that goes through to nations that are still being affected from the economic ramifications of the pandemic. Let's in fact listen in to what leaders had to say after the declaration was accepted.
हमारी टीम्स के हार्डवर्क से और आप सभी के सहयोग से नई दिल्ली G20 लीडर्स समिट डिक्लेरेशन पर सहमति बनी है। मेरा प्रस्ताव है कि इस लीडर्स डिक्लेरेशन को भी एडॉप्ट किया जाए। मैं इस डिक्लेरेशन को एडॉप्ट करने की घोषणा करता हूं। इस अवसर पर मैं हमारे मंत्रीगण, शेरपा और सभी अधिकारियों का हृदय से अभिनंदन करता हूं।
Today, as I look back at the 10 months of Indian presidency, I am left with gratitude and satisfaction. I can confidently state that the Indian G20 presidency has walked the talk. India, as you all are aware, through the India Stack, became the first country to develop all three foundational DPIs. So DPI has also been integrated into the G20 Financial Inclusion Action Plan, the FIAP, which will run between 2024 and 2026. That's a strong legacy of the Indian presidency.
With regard to the to the comparison with the Bali Declaration, I would only say Bali was Bali and New Delhi is New Delhi. I mean, Bali was a year ago. The context, the situation was different. Many things have happened since then.
This has laid the foundation for very bold action, but more than anything else, it has amplified the voice of Global South. It has also demonstrated that India has a huge capacity of bringing the world together and leading the world in developmental and geopolitical issues as well.
We just took a plain screen and I scribbled down about 15 principles which we should follow. And then all the Sherpas joined in and gave their perspective on it, and all of them we took. Based on that, we did the first draft, and nobody expected this that we'll arrive at a consensus. Then on the first draft, we had a number of reactions. People were very pessimistic that we could ever arrive at a consensus on the Russia-Ukraine crisis because all multilateral, bilateral forums across the world have failed to arrive at a consensus during the last 1 year. Then from that first draft, we started with that comment. We went to the second draft, we went to the third draft. But I think after that, the bilateral meetings with each country, important thing was to draw the red lines of each country. We drew the red lines of each country.
Your most significant takeaway from the G20 Leaders Summit in New Delhi?
Well, I think the fact that there was a declaration and that declaration got everyone together. And I also think it really has improved India's standing in the world.
There you heard the leaders talk about what impacted them the most or what they took from what happened at the G20 summit. Now, there have been some big moments that took place, and what are the key takeaways? What are the significant developments in the G20 summit? Take a look.
हमारी टीम्स के हार्डवर्क से और आप सभी के सहयोग से नई दिल्ली G20 लीडर्स समिट डिक्लेरेशन पर सहमति बनी है। मेरा प्रस्ताव है कि इस लीडर्स डिक्लेरेशन को भी एडॉप्ट किया जाए। मैं इस डिक्लेरेशन को एडॉप्ट करने की घोषणा करता हूं।
A big bang announcement at the mega G20 summit. A consensus on Delhi Declaration announced by the Prime Minister. A big diplomatic breakthrough. A demonstration of India's leadership in the world today. A mega start of a mega meet. Bharat Mandapam all decked up to host the world's most powerful leaders. First to arrive, the Prime Minister himself. He received the guests with hugs and handshakes. Heads of states and chiefs of top global organizations such as the World Bank, the IMF, the UN and the WHO all greeted by Prime Minister Modi in the backdrop of the majestic Konark Wheel. Prime Minister Modi took a moment to explain its significance to US President Joe Biden. Built in the 13th century, the 24-spoke wheel embodies India's ancient wisdom, advanced civilization and architectural excellence. The rotating motion of the Konark wheel symbolizes time and continuous change. It serves as a powerful symbol of the wheel of democracy that reflects the resilience of democratic ideals and commitment to progress in society. as Prime Minister Modi kicked off the summit, the first big announcement.
मैं अफ्रीकन यूनियन के अध्यक्ष को G20 के स्थायी सदस्य के रूप में अपना स्थान ग्रहण करने के लिए आमंत्रित करता हूं.
Inclusion of 55-member African Union into the G20. India had pitched hard for African Union's inclusion and the United States supported the proposal. G20 under India's presidency has seen the largest ever participation of the African countries. Another unmissable image from the opening was Prime Minister's nameplate that said Bharat instead of conventional India.
Now, another major impact-driven meeting that took place was 6 bilaterals that took place in the last 2 days. Now, Prime Minister held 2 power pack meetings, which of course was with the President of US, Joe Biden, as well as the Prime Minister of UK, PM Rishi Sunak. Now, here's a report on the details of these 2 major bilaterals as well as the other bilaterals. India has achieved a great feat by bringing together consensus in New Delhi Leaders' Declaration. My colleague Vasudha takes us through the most significant moments from the day.
India's G20 presidency has many achievements. It has also left a legacy of sorts. The most important achievement here is, of course, the inclusion of the African Union in the G20 as a permanent member. Remember, the African Union is a combine of 55 nations. African countries have been severely underrepresented in the G20 for all these years, and African leaders have been asking for representation. Remember, Africa is also at the brunt of many world problems, including food insecurity and the concerns that have risen from the ongoing conflict between Ukraine and Russia. But apart from that, there's also DPI, India's DPI, Digital Public Infrastructure, and the template of UPI and DPI, which has now led to the formation of One Future Alliance that was announced in the G20 press conference today. Now, as part of this, a multi-institution will come into being, which will streamline the use of DPI in national governance, in public governance, and will also help developing countries and members of G20 understand how digital governance can help them improve their public delivery. So these are two important things. But other than that, what I think is an important announcement is, of course, the announcement of India, Middle East, Europe corridor, which the Prime Minister talked about today. He also had US President Joe Biden and the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, and of course the head of UAE, Mohammed bin Zayed, also sitting next to him. Of course, senior officials from EU were also there. Now, this is an important project which looks at connecting important places in 3 continents and across countries. Prime Minister Narendra Modi said that this is India-led and this will help India become the bridge between West Asia and of course Europe, and this is going to be an important project even from the geopolitics sense of things. Remember that countries have also been trying to counter China's One Belt, One Road project, because that also poses national security risks to some countries, including India. So this is seen as an effective counter to that. This will lead to quality infrastructure in different countries. At the same time, will also improve commercial activity and give some impetus to investment opportunities. Other than that, there was also this Global Biofuels Alliance that was announced today on the sidelines of the G20 Summit. This announcement was made by the Prime Minister himself. This is also in line with India's push for use of sustainable sources of energy. Remember, in the last few years, due to unprecedented climate crisis, many countries have expedited their climate action plans, and Global Biofuels Alliance is going to help countries understand the potential of biofuels. India has been working with countries in Africa to understand the assessment of biofuels and also use of ethanol blending in various processes, and especially the use of ethanol in household cooking. This is something that India has been doing. It has also been promoting government schemes like Gobardhan and PM Jivan Nidhi, which is also looking at promoting the use of biofuels. So these are some important alliances that have come into place after India's push in its own G20 presidency.
Now, the national capital has been decked with lights and groomed for the G20 summit. From monuments to gardens, landmarks of Delhi bask under the spotlight. Take a look at this report.
Garlands, lights, water and laser light shows, spotlessly clean roads, the capital at its finest. A fitting touch as the G20 under India's leadership adopted the strongest ever outcome document, the New Delhi Leaders' Declaration, a landmark moment in India's foreign policy. From tricolour lights at the country's top court to decorative umbrellas and lights at the Jama Masjid, from trees wrapped with marigolds across the city to hotels accommodating delegates with the G20 theme and spirit. The decorations started right from where delegates touched down in Delhi to the iconic monument they'll visit before departing on Sunday.
Decked up, all its major spots also decked up, and tomorrow we're going to witness a visual that is extremely significant as far as India's G20 presidency is concerned, with all these global leaders, top leaders of the world visiting the Rajghat to pay their tributes before they depart.
Not just iconic monuments, but the entire city wears the tricolour with pride for India's historic G20 presidency. As entrepreneur Ashneer Grover put it in his trending video shot while taking a drive around the city, Delhi truly is at its prettiest. The New Delhi Leaders' Declaration made India's G20 presidency truly historic, one that will have impacts far and beyond for the years to come. But the lights, the glitz, the fountains and the decorations across the capital city, including here at the Qutub Minar, all came together to make this historic moment picture perfect. In New Delhi with Vedant Agarwal, camera person Ashwini Mehra and Sushil Rathi, Priyanshi Sharma for NDTV.
We'll continue bringing you the latest on the G20 Summit. For now, we take a short break.
सो डिजिटल इंडिया की जर्नी क्या है सर?
डिजिटल इंडिया की जर्नी ये हमने क्या किया है कि साइकिलिंग के माध्यम से हर सारे प्रोजेक्ट्स के बारे में बताना शुरू कर रहे हैं। तो एक तरफ आप मिशन लाइफस्टाइल फॉर एनवायरनमेंट फिट इंडिया का मैसेज लेते हैं और जब आप साइकिल करते हैं तो आपका ध्यान स्क्रीन पे केंद्रित रहता है और जैसे जैसे आप आगे बढ़ते हैं आपको एक एक मुकाम आते जाएंगे और इन प्रोजेक्ट्स के बारे में संक्षिप्त जानकारी मिलती जाएगी। अब बाद में आप स्टॉल पे जाके पूरी जानकारी ले सकते हैं। जैसे ONDC आया, अब भाई आप ONDC के मुकाम पे पहुंचे, ये बताता है कि 80 नेटवर्क पार्टिसिपेंट्स हैं और 1,70,000 सेलर्स इसके ऊपर ऑनबोर्डेड हैं और अब आप अपने गंतव्य मुकाम पे पहुंच गए और तब आपको एक प्रमाण पत्र मिलता है कि कांग्रेचुलेशन।
सो आई हैव कंप्लीटेड द जर्नी।
यस। तो
ठीक है, आज सुबह एक्सरसाइज नहीं हुई तो एक्सरसाइज यहाँ पर हो गई।
बिल्कुल, और ये 2 दिनों तक उपलब्ध है। जब भी आप लगा कि आपको ज्यादा कुछ खा लिया है, थोड़ा कैलोरीज लूज करिए, यहाँ के आइए, ज्ञान लीजिए और एक्सरसाइज भी करिए।
Welcome back. One of the biggest takeaways of India's G20 presidency is the inclusion of the African Union in the grouping. Now, India emerges as the voice of the global south, and the key message that lies is the inclusion of something enumerated by the Prime Minister himself. Take a look.
सबका साथ की भावना से ही भारत ने प्रस्ताव रखा था कि अफ्रीकन यूनियन को G20 की स्थायी सदस्यता दी जाए। मेरा विश्वास है कि इस प्रस्ताव पर हम सबकी सहमति है। आगे की कार्रवाई शुरू करने से पहले मैं अफ्रीकन यूनियन के अध्यक्ष को G20 के स्थायी सदस्य के रूप में अपना स्थान ग्रहण करने के लिए आमंत्रित करता हूं।
The biggest takeaway of India's push to include Global South in this influential group of nations. And a shining moment of India's G20 presidency.
Thanks to India as the host, which from the onset in its presidency of the G20 championed inclusivity, championed the stronger voice for smaller countries and developing economic countries. And so thanks go largely to India, but we are certainly delighted and we see this as a very meaningful step going forward in terms of the various challenges that the world has to tackle with respect to climate change, with respect to security, that now Africa is going to be included in the deliberations of the G20 going forward.
It is a matter of particular satisfaction for us that the African Union has this morning become a permanent member of the G20, that too during the Indian presidency. This is in keeping with the priority that we attach to addressing the urgent concerns of the Global South.
Including the African Union was India's idea, floated in June this year when the Prime Minister wrote to G20 leaders proposing the African Union be given full membership. The African Union is a grouping that represents 55 countries, and the idea of including the African Union on the lines of the European Union came from the Voice of the Global South Summit in January this year. India has prioritized interests of the African countries in the G20 agenda. The Prime Minister himself has visited at least 10 countries in Africa since coming to power. India also wants to bridge physical and digital connectivity gaps through strategic investments in infrastructure.
My colleague Maria has had a conversation with Kamar Sibal, who's a former Foreign Secretary for India and also former diplomat. Take a look.
100% consensus which India managed even on the issue of Ukraine. West was not ready to step back in terms of language. How difficult it was to achieve this?
I think it was big success of Indian diplomacy to have achieved this feat, frankly. I also did not expect a leadership declaration to necessarily emerge because of the deep differences between the West on the one hand and Russia and China on the other, to the point that Russia was not willing to accept even the Bali language. And on the other hand, the West, until now, until the last moment, has been saying that they will not step back from what they wanted in terms of language, criticizing, condemning Russia for the Ukraine conflict. Now, I think a lot of effort has gone into this. Russia has emerged, to my mind, very successful diplomatically, because Russia itself is not mentioned by name in the paragraphs on Ukraine. And there's no condemnation at all of Russia. There are general principles that have been enunciated about respect for sovereignty, and that countries should not try and through aggression take control over the territory of a foreign country. There are humanitarian issues that have been mentioned, as also the consequences of the Ukraine conflict with regard to disruption of supply chains, food, fertilizer, energy prices, and all that. But there is no condemnation, which is very important. The second thing I want to say is that on the U.S. side, on the Western side, there has been certainly a much more constructive approach. They could have stuck to their position, insisted that the language they wanted should be included, but they have stepped back for two reasons. One, they don't want the G20 platform to break up, because that will be inevitably the result of this, because the G20 would have lost its relevance if at the leadership they could not go beyond their much narrower concerns with regard to the Ukraine conflict, and in fact do not want to actually arrive at a consensus on all the larger questions that confront the international community, which are far more serious in nature than what is happening in Ukraine. So I think they wanted to save the G20 platform. I think indirectly, whether this was intentionally done or not done, they have also strengthened Prime Minister Modi's diplomatic and political position by giving him this success at this point in time, because it would have naturally hit at India's prestige and the Prime Minister's own prestige if we had not succeeded in issuing a joint statement. And the third is that they have been conscious that the BRICS is emerging as a countervailing force. It has been expanded, and it will be expanded more next year, and no Western country is present. In the G20, there is G7 and other Western countries, plus developing countries, the important emerging economies. So it's a joint platform on which a consensus can be built between the West and the rest. But in the BRICS, there is only the rest. There is no West. So they don't want to lose ground internationally to BRICS, and therefore they want to keep the G20 alive. And hence, I think they have decided to make this concession and accept a language which does not condemn Russia at all.